This week on Vaticano, discover the special year dedicated to St. Francis and witness the rare exposition of his relics inside the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. Have you ever wondered what St. Francis truly looked like? Join us in Subiaco, where the earliest known portrait of the saint was painted during his lifetime. And in a story that reflects the Franciscan call to serve the poor, we meet Craig Joring of Hope of the Poor, serving families in Mexico with faith, compassion, and hope. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. With a papal decree, Pope Leo XIV has proclaimed a Jubilee year dedicated to St. Francis, running from January the 10th, 2026 to January the 10th, 2027, a year in which every Christian is called to follow the example of the Saint of Assisi, carrying his timeless message of peace to the world with renewed commitment. 8 centuries have passed since the death of the poor man of Assisi, and his city is now at the heart of an extraordinary celebration, a moment that speaks not only to believers, but to all of humanity.
Assisi becomes indeed a capital, but a capital of what? Of witnesses, men and women like Francis, like Claire, and now Carlo Acutis joins them. People who said, yes, it is possible. Slow down. Stop for every brother you meet. This is what I feel called to say to every baptized Christian. It does not matter who you run for in life. What matters is who you are able to stop for. Because if you have run so fast and missed the essential relationships, you will find yourself caught in a great restlessness, and you will taste nothing of life.
For 800 years, the symbol of this forgiveness and this indulgence has been the Portiuncula, housed within the Basilica of Santa Maria degli Angeli, the very place where St. Francis of Assisi came to understand his vocation, founded the Order of the Friars Minor, and gave the world the inspiration of the Pardon of Assisi.
It was here, at the Portiuncula, that Francis, after the Pardon of Assisi, declared, "I want to send you all to heaven, and heaven is already here. But one must stop in order to listen to oneself and to hear the voice that dwells within."
For pilgrims journeying to Assisi in 2026, a rare and precious gift awaits: the Pardon of Assisi, made available once again through the plenary indulgence granted by Pope Leo XIV.
Francis is a significant figure, and the Church, through the Holy Father, recognizes that he can be meaningful even for those who are not, strictly speaking, Franciscan, because he is precisely this blessing. Those who listen to him live as brothers and sisters. Those who listen to him live in peace. Those who listen to him care for nature. Those who listen to him build relationships founded on respect and service.
A dense program of liturgical and cultural gatherings will mark the year, each one a reflection of the life and the most cherished values of St. Francis.
There will even be a conference dedicated to the dignity of death, held at Santa Maria degli Angeli in the final days of the Extension at the end of March, followed by the great feast of St. Francis.
We wanted to create, to conceive, a national conference together with the Catholic University and the Gemelli Polyclinic in Rome, one that would explore 3 words that Francis himself used in the canticle: illness, tribulation, and death. 3 words that, the moment we encounter them, place us in a state of heightened awareness, stirring feelings of fear, fragility, and the question of how we will face them.
Di come le affronteremo.
On October the 27th, an interreligious day of prayer and reflection for peace will be held, marking the 40th anniversary of the first such gathering called for by St. Pope John Paul II. But the most significant event will take place on August the 6th, when young people from across Europe will make their pilgrimage to Assisi to meet a very special guest, Pope Leo XIV. For all those who will not be able to make the pilgrimage to Assisi in person, the organizers have conceived a special alternative pilgrimage.
Per questo abbiamo creato questa nostra
This is why we created our app, called San Francesco Digitale. In addition to hosting our magazines, which can be read in multiple languages thanks to an automatic translator that allows access, even in Afghan. It brings together our websites and our events in one place. It is a way, so to speak, of being here without being here, of following us from wherever you are.
sia per App Store che per Google Play.
The Jubilee Year of St. Francis unfolds as a journey to be lived with open hearts, rooted in his values, nurtured in his city, and reaching out to the whole world, carrying his timeless message of peace, fraternity, and forgiveness. In just a few moments, we'll return to witness the extraordinary display of St. Francis's relics. The Basilica of Santa Maria degli Angeli in Assisi shelters within its walls one of the most significant places in the Christian world, the Porziuncola, the humble chapel where St. Francis founded his order. The same basilica holds the original cord of St. Francis, including a location that is far too often passed unnoticed by the faithful, where St. Francis took his last breath.
Siamo alla Cappella del Transito, il luogo dove la sera del 3 ottobre.
We are at the Chapel of the Transitus, the place where, on the evening of October 3rd, 1226, Francis completely surrendered himself to what he would call Sister Death. It is an absolutely important place, right beside the Porziuncola, and it is also the place where Francis chose to spend his final
Le
weeks.
ultime settimane, sappiamo che fino all'estate del 1226
We know that until the summer of 1226, he had been staying at the bishop's residence up in Assisi, but after the doctor visited him and gave him a deadline for his life, Francis wanted to return to the Porziuncola, the place where it all began.
il luogo dal quale tutto ha avuto inizio.
Every year, millions of pilgrims make their way to the Basilica of Santa Maria degli Angeli, drawn by centuries of devotion to St. Francis and the sacred places it shelters. The site remains one of the most visited shrines in all of Italy. As for Francis himself, his body rested here only briefly after his death in 1226, transferred to the non-extant Church of St. George, then in 1230 to the newly built Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, where it has lain ever since.
Il corpo di Francesco è stato ritrovato nel 1818.
The body of Francis was rediscovered in 1818, following excavations carried out here in the Basilica, in search of the sacred core around which this entire church was built, his tomb. At that point, a formal recognition took place, and the body of Francis was rearranged and restored to the very same tomb where it had rested since 1230, and where it remains to this day.
Trovato dal 1230 e si trova ancora.
To mark the 800th anniversary of St. Francis's death, February the 21st became a historic date. The day began with the solemn exhumation of his remains from the crypt, followed in the afternoon by the celebration of the translation and the prayer of Vespers in the lower basilica, presided over by Cardinal Ángel Fernández Artime, with Franciscan friars from across the world gathered in prayer before their founder. The cameras of the world's media were welcomed in only after this moment of Franciscan fraternity had drawn to a close. In 1978, the remains were placed in a plexiglass case, where he's still preserved today. Oxygen has been removed and helium injected into the case, ensuring the best possible conditions for conservation.
Era stato raccomandato da chi allora aveva fatto questa operazione.
Those who had carried out that operation had recommended that periodic inspections be conducted. Not a formal recognition, but simply a check to assess the condition of the remains, whether they were holding up, whether the bones were intact and not crumbling. And so it was, both in 1995, if I recall correctly, and again in 2015, when I happened to be here in Assisi, not in my current role, but simply as a friar of the community. That evening, together with all the friars of Assisi, we were given the opportunity to spend a few moments beside the remains of Francis, close to the place where he normally rests.
Poter essere accanto alle spoglie di Francesco per qualche minuto. Giù presso.
And I must say that perhaps it was precisely that experience which left me with the desire to share it with others. I lived it myself, and whenever I experience something truly beautiful, I find myself wanting as many people as possible to be able to share in that beauty.
E di solito quando vivo qualcosa di bello desidero che tanti altri possano godere di questa bellezza.
On the very first day of the extraordinary public exposition, 18,000 pilgrims made their way to Assisi to see the remains of St. Francis, and 370,000 have been registered so far. Among those were young people, pilgrim groups, married couples, individual families, and even curious visitors. For many, it has been an experience beyond words.
What does St. Francis represent for you?
Everything.
Un'immensa felicità, un'immensa forza che lui ci dà.
An immense joy, an immense strength that he gives us year after year. We come to St. Francis every year, and I always wondered if I would ever be able to see something more than just the tomb. And that wish has now been granted, to see his remains.
Esaudito a vedere le sue spoglie.
For me, St. Francis represents a powerful example of humanity and of rediscovery. A return to essential human values, stripped of everything superfluous. And it is precisely for this reason that he remains such an important and meaningful figure.
È stata una grande emozione perché
it was a deeply moving experience because we never expected to see him so closely. I imagined the case would be far away, at a distance from the faithful, and instead we passed right beside it. Being able to touch him, even without physically doing so, gives you an absolute sense of serenity.
Trasmette una serenità assoluta.
The remains of St. Francis will be on public display in Assisi until March the 22nd, 2026. The event, which requires free registration through the official website, sanfrancescovive.org, also includes liturgical celebrations and moments of prayer throughout the month. On the edge of Mexico City, a landfill known as El Bordo has become a place of survival. Among mountains of discarded plastic and metal, street children trapped in addiction and families with nowhere else to go search for anything that can be recycled and anything that can be sold. Many live without running water or electricity, in conditions no one should endure. For Craig Joring, Danny Ledger, and the team at Hope of the Poor, they're not outsiders. They call them family. Founded by a man who spent 8 years working in the dumps, the mission is simple: bring hope to those who feel forgotten, feeding families, helping them find work, supporting rehabilitation. More than 120 families have been helped so far, and every day they serve over 250 homeless people outside the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe. They brought that mission to Rome, sharing it with Pope Leo XIV during a general audience.
I would spend part of my day helping the kids on the street. Eventually I moved to being full-time and just doing that full-time. But the first group of street kids that I was able to make contact with. I was able to be accepted into their community, and they began to trust me, and I brought food to them, and I just cared for them and just loved them unconditionally. And it was an amazing experience. What I've done over the years is to help the kids to start to go to school and to give them school uniforms, school supplies, and so that they could go to school and have everything they needed to get an education, because the way out of the landfill is for the kids to get an education. And then eventually they'll get a job, and then they'll be able to support their family to leave the dump. When people are valued, they're loved, and they're appreciated, and they're given a place to live out their life with dignity, they begin to believe in themselves and begin to think that they can do something more than what they're doing. I think that people change when they're believed in, and that is just fertile ground for people to just be all that God is making them to be. And today many are working full-time jobs after just a year, after starting being on the street, and today they're out of the street, out of drugs, and working a full-time job.
Do you think they will come back to their communities and try to make a change themselves?
Oh, absolutely, because I believe the gospel works when people give it away. Almost all of my staff are former drug users. They're people who grew up as street kids on the street. They survived, and now they've left their addictions, and they and their families are off the street and now working for Hope of the Poor to help other people. In the past, it would take me a year or 2 years to build trust with someone. Very quickly, we build trust because the people who are doing outreach are people that were on the street, and they speak the language of a person who's on the street, and they can give a testimony of their life change and really give hope to someone on the street that they can change.
Their work continues to grow. Each year, around 450 volunteers from the United States travel to Mexico with Hope of the Poor. One of them is Danny Ledger, director of Hope of the Poor in Omaha, who says the mission is both practical and spiritual, and often leads prayer through music.
It was so powerful for me to just walk with him to the poor and to see, like, as people walked by on the street, they would look at us like we were crazy because we're just there with the street kids at an intersection, and we're just there with 2 chickens and some hot sauce and some tortillas and just hanging out with them, sharing a meal. But really what we were doing is building trust with them so then we could help them have a new life. I think a lot of people want to serve the poor, and they don't know how. We want to build trust, and then we become friends, and then really we become a family.
Do you remember any story, a person, a face, somebody whose life has changed because of this project?
I think the first person that comes to mind is Luis. He's one of our street kids, and I remember I am not down working with Craig full-time in Mexico. I go down periodically, and so all of a sudden I go down and there's this scary looking guy with face tattoos, and he's hanging around, and I look at Craig and I'm like, who's this guy? And he goes, it's okay, he works for us now. And as he was working with us, he started to have like a deep conversion and came into the church. And as I go down, I see his spiritual growth, and now he's leading all these other street guys and helping other people get off the street. One of the things that inspired me most is I was down there just a few weeks ago, and he had started a Bible study in the rehab center with the people that we had taken off the street and brought into the rehab center. He's there every day leading a Bible study with his other guys that work on his team for Hope of the Poor, and it's just so beautiful to see his transformation and growth. I don't think there's anything more powerful, though, than bringing people to encounter Christ in the poor.
After a short break, meet the real St. Francis. his first portrait comes alive in Subiaco. High above the Aniene Valley, a monastery clings to the rock. This is the Holy Cave, built around the grotto where Saint Benedict of Nursia withdrew as a young hermit, letting silence, prayer, and work shape a new path for the Church of Western monasticism. But deep inside these caves is an unexpected glimpse of another saint, Saint Francis. Father Maurizio Vivera, prior of the Sacro Specco Monastery, reveals that Saint Francis of Assisi came here searching for what Benedict found here first: silence, prayer, and the beauty of creation.
Francesco viene qui, rimarrà qualche tempo qui, non sappiamo quanti giorni.
Francis came here and stayed for a time, and then he was, in a sense, immortalized, because we have this very famous fresco. And he surely remained here in prayer, out of devotion to the Benedictines, who would later inspire him in some way. In fact, we can say that when Francis first begins his journey, he has no idea of founding an order. He wants to live on his own. His model is Saint Benedict. But later, he sets that idea aside and founds the Franciscan order.
E fonderà l'ordine francescano come lo conosciamo, che è molto diverso da quello benedettino.
That immortalized image is still here in the caves, drawing pilgrims in to witness Saint Francis as a living man. And few know this place better than Martina Amati, an art historian who welcomes hundreds of visitors each day. She calls Francis the most famous pilgrim of them all, and she takes us inside the chapel of St. Gregory to show what she describes as an ancient photograph of his visit.
Welcome to the chapel of St. Gregory, where the true effigy of Francis is kept.
Questo ritratto probabilmente viene fatto.
This portrait was probably made during Francis of Assisi's visit here in 1223. He came to accompany Ugolino d'Ostia, who would later become Pope Gregory IX, who during that visit consecrated a small chapel, and that is probably why an anonymous monk of the monastery decided to paint St. Francis's portrait.
Del monastero decise di ritrarre Francesco.
And in that image, Francis appears in his early 40s, not as a saint, but as a friar. Simple habit, rope belt, holding a message of peace.
Qui Francesco è rappresentato.
Here Francis is portrayed probably at his real-life size, more or less what people's average height was at the time. First of all, there's no halo, which suggests he was still alive. He's identified simply as Brother Francis. He's wearing that ash-gray habit, which indicates this is before the formal approval of the Franciscan order, which would come a few months later under Pope Honorius III. And he has no stigmata, which he would receive the following year at Laverna in 1224.
A Laverna nel 1224.
Up close, the Byzantine-influenced style invites a spiritual reading. In the language of iconography, some interpret the enlarged ears as attentiveness to the Word of God, the strong throat as a sign of being filled with the Holy Spirit, and the hand at the heart as the source of peace. And in his left hand, a scroll reads, Pax Vic Domui, peace to this house. But the fresco doesn't speak only in symbols. It also preserves a striking historical detail, one that points to the real Francis.
Ciò che ci dice che è Francesco.
What tells us this is Francis is a detail in his face. You can see that one eye is larger and the other smaller. This is probably the sign of a harsh eye operation Francis underwent at Fonte Colombo, near Rieti, before coming to Subiaco. and treatment for what is thought to have been an eye infection he likely contracted in the Holy Land.
Che aveva contratto in Terra Santa.
For centuries, pilgrims have come to this sanctuary and many have left something behind. Names, prayers, and marks etched into the walls, often near the saints they felt closest to. And on Francis's portrait, Martina points to a signature that surprises visitors.
For example, on the portrait of Francis, you can find what he might call an illustrious signature because it reads, "I was Pope Pius II." We know that Pope Pius, il Piccolomini, passed through here in 1461, visiting the monasteries, and he left his name.
E lascia la sua firma.
Martina Amati says this portrait became a model, an image of Francis that began to spread, shaping how later artists would picture him, even in Cimabue's famous fresco in Assisi. And you can see that spread already here, a later copy on the opposite wall. Together they form what art historians sometimes call a double portrait of Francis of Assisi, pointing even more strongly to his visit to this place.